I don't know how fake feel, nigga. Cause all my life I've been a real nigga.
What's good with y'all? It's Face the Real. Y'all know what it is, and it may sound like it, but there's no malice in my intent. That's real. Disclaimer. I played Dark Souls 2 in 2017 for the first time. My first FromSoft game was Bloodborne at its launch back in 2015, followed by Dark Souls 3 the day it came out in 2016. I then went back and played Demon Souls on the PlayStation 3 as well as Dark Souls Prepare to Die Edition on the PlayStation 3 afterwards, followed by Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin. Also, I do not care about the lore, so this video will not speak on it. I am not saying the lore is trash or unenjoyable, but I am saying that I play these games for the gameplay primarily, and that is all. I also do not invade and try not to participate in invasions, as I like to feel isolated in the world with next to no help or other players in the game in general. Now, onwards to the greatness of Dark Souls 2. This video has been on my mind since I made the video detailing how Bloodborne saved my life. If you are interested in finding out how and why, the link to that video will be in the description. Anyway, I love Dark Souls 2. I admittedly have never played the original version that released on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, as the only version I had played is Scholar of the First Sin back in 2017, which I hear is mostly the same anyway. Due to this, I completely missed the whole switcheroo from software gave fans when the game dropped, as opposed to what was advertised in the trailers at the time. I also read that there were some gameplay promises that weren't fulfilled, like the torch being used more across the game instead of in very isolated moments in the game, like the gulch and repelling spiders. I'm sure there are more broken promises, but those were the main ones that I came across when I was reading gamers' testimonies around the time the game launched. However, the general consensus of this being the worst Dark Souls game never resonated with me. Honestly, they are all amazing games for different reasons in their own right, but Dark Souls 2 is head and shoulders over the others when it comes to replayability, in my opinion. The main thing that sticks out for me in this entry is that unlike Dark Souls 1 that has Lost Isolate, which is objectively the worst level in that game because it isn't finished, and Dark Souls 3 that has Fear and Keep, which is also the worst area in that game, Dark Souls 2 doesn't have a single level that I dread reaching in every playthrough after my first handful of characters. My initial playthrough, I hated the first part of Iron Keep, but ever since my third character, I purposely despawned the Knights for Souls so I can clear the fog door more easily to the Smelter Demon. I also hated Shrine of Amana, but once I decided to bring a bow, it made the area child's play. Also, Shrine of Amana has become my favorite area to traverse in the game next to No Man's Wharf. The thing I love about the levels is that it truly felt like a video game. While the other Dark Souls games are rightfully praised for their interconnectivity of the levels, I really enjoyed how each level seemed randomly placed in Dark Souls 2. The main gripe that I have seen with this complaint is how Iron Keep is reached through Earthen Peak, for example. You venture through Poisonous Caverns, defeat the boss of that area, who is Maitha, the Baneful Queen, and get on the elevator that's behind her boss arena. You take a long ride up and up and up and up until you reach the top, only to see lava with a castle in the sky. Look, I can completely see why folks would not enjoy this kind of level design, but the first time I saw this, I enjoyed it. This is an example of the player having no idea what kind of area you are venturing into, and the game does a good job surprising you. The levels themselves range from passable to very good design-wise, but no level is as bad as the bad levels in the other Dark Souls games, in my opinion. However, some of the areas in Dark Souls 1 and 3 are better than almost everything Dark Souls 2 could muster up, but I get a nod that Dark Souls 2 is a more enjoyable experience on replays. Also, the world design is semi-open world and allows a lot of freedom when it comes down to what areas you want to get to first. For example, at the beginning of the game, you are tasked with collecting lore souls from certain bosses to get into Drain Lake Castle. In the beginning, you can only go to Forest of the Fallen Giants, which ends up leading to the Old Center, or head in the opposite direction in Majula, until you reach Tower Heidi's Flame, which leads to one of my favorite areas in the game, No Man's Wharf, where a ship travels to the backside of Lost but Still, where the Old Center is. But here's the thing. There's an NPC that appears at the top of the arena where you fight the dragon right at the end of Tower Heidi's Flame that can move the tunnel past Majula for a few thousand souls, which opens up a whole new area to explore. This new area will be Harvest Valley to Earthen Peak all the way to Iron Keep. If you do not want to go there for whatever reason, then you can head north of Majula and use the fragrant branch of Yor, the statue here, to open up another area. These areas consist of some of my favorite areas in the entire game, such as the Shaded Woods that just has a doomed atmosphere due to the ghosts roaming around the city in the curse jars. Then we get the Doors of Pharaohs, which has midget lumberjacks, and I mean, if we're being honest, who doesn't love midget lumberjacks? The area itself is aesthetically pleasing to me. And then we get the Brightstone Cove Sadora, which is some caves that leads to a more open, sandy beach area. I actually really enjoy the whole torch scaring the spiders away dynamic that makes the boss fight with Du Freya more fun, since by itself it is a fun boss in my opinion, but with the spiders that seemingly infinitely respawn attacking you as well as Duke, when it's a fun fight turns into a F this game fight. So light the torch before you leave the bonfire outside the church, or use those portable torch thingies I forgot the name of. Drain Lake is beautiful to me, and I enjoy traversing through it to get to the top. At this point, the game adopts a more linear structure and you are just going through the motions. The headless mannequins are among my least favorite enemies in the game, but nowadays I can easily handle them. There are some enemies in Dark Souls and Dark Souls 3 that I randomly die to, even though I've beaten the entire trilogy an innumerable amount of times across multiple platforms. In Dark Souls 1, I have a high chance of dying to the wheel skeletons, since as I'm trying to kite them, one ends up stunning me, and well, you know the rest. In Dark Souls 3, it's the Gru right there in Fair Keep. If I do not kill it before it starts pouncing around, then I lose regardless of my build. Very frustrating enemy. With the mannequins, all you really need is a shield and you're good to go. The next two bosses are my favorite bosses in the base game, which is the boss that will be at the top of the castle when you get there, the Looking Glass Knight. This fight has rain and some killer background music that matches not only the arena but the fight itself. I think the knight has a pretty decent moveset to keep you on your toes, but overall isn't too difficult in my opinion. That is, until he throws his shield down and summons a friend from his mirror. Overall, I love the fight and I love the next boss fight as well. Before we get to that boss, we have to go through Shrine of Amana. This area is the epitome of choose your difficulty. If you just move slowly, watch out for deep water, attack enemies with a bow when needed, you will most likely be fine. Past that, the area itself is beautiful and a sight to see to look at. It's actually my favorite looking area in the game. The boss at the end of the area is Demon of Song, and wow, this boss has a crazy unique design. I remember actually feeling a bit weird when I first saw it. The music that accompanies it is a nice touch as well. And although I enjoy his moveset just as much as I do its appearance, the boss is still extremely easy. Still, easy doesn't mean it can't be fun. After that, you end up in the undead crypt to fight Velstat, who is a typical armor mace knight guy. I don't hate the fight, but I also don't remember ever dying to this guy either, which is all I'm saying. You pick up the King's Ring, and as I said all that just to say this, the game opens up once again. You are tasked with venturing out and finding a few king's doors scattered across the land and obtaining items and clearing bosses in each zone. The thing is, you can do this in any order you want except for the final boss, which is behind the king's door at the bottom of Dream Lake Castle. This pretty much coincides with my initial statement that the game is semi-open world, since there are both linear and more open progressive paths in the main campaign. This leaves room for the game to have a decent level of replay value, and since the build variety is also insane, it makes for a very fulfilling game. The game also has my favorite hub in any Soulsborne game, including Bloodborne, which is my favorite FromSoft game and in my top 10 games of all time. Majula is beautiful. The music is so somber and peaceful, with a bonfire placed right by a gorgeous sunset overlooking the sea. The area is just beautiful. A few years back, on my birthday, I spent it by myself, unfortunately. I booted up Dark Souls 2 and just stood in Majula for a good half hour before beginning the game. The merchants are all likable as well and not too spread out to the point you cannot find them. But to be fair, the other hubs in the Soulsborne games have this luxury as well. However, the ambiance for Majula is just unmatched in my opinion, and as I write this, I can hear that gorgeous music playing that has soothed me in dark times many times in the past, and I'm sure it will continue to do so in the future. My next points may be controversial to fellow veteran Souls players, but I really do enjoy the enemy placements as well as the enemy density. This is because it simply gives me more things to kill with my build. There are some mobs that I run past, like the huge mob of knights before you reach the Sentinel Knights and Lost but Still, but I am the type of player to kill majority of the enemies in the map before moving on. It's just always been enjoyable for me to do in the Soulsborne games, and it always gives me an excess amount of souls or blood echoes to level up my build at a reasonable rate. Enemies do tend to chase you a lot farther in this game than the other games, but since I usually kill them anyway and do not rush through areas, this is a non-issue for me. There's also a neat option to despawn an area of its enemies if you kill them around a dozen times. For some reason, this is absent in the other Soulsborne games, and I wish the despawn mechanic made a reappearance in the games that came after it. There is also an item called the Bonfire Aesthetic that not only respawns enemies in a given area, but allows that stretch of an area between bonfires to go into the next new game cycle. This means if you are on a regular new game, you can use a bonfire aesthetic at a bonfire to make that area into New Game Plus, or New Game Plus 3 if you're on New Game Plus already. This allows you to fight bosses again without beating the entire game, which in turn allows you to get certain weapons quicker as well. I also really love the combat and how it feels. To me, it feels weighty and really deliberate, which makes fights against even trash mobs feel satisfying to me. You see, the other Soulsborne games allows you to spam R1 and then dodge more easier due to being able to hit R1 and the dodge button right after to cancel out certain attacks from weapons. In Dark Souls 2, if you hit R1, you better be sure there was an opening because you would not be able to dodge properly until your swing is finished. I also like how stamina management is a lot more crucial in this game, so you can't spam the dodge button with little to no consequences. Everything appears to take more stamina in comparison to the other games, from attacking to running to blocking with a shield down to actual dodging. I completely understand why some people find this not to be enjoyable, but for me, it adds another layer of strategy for me that adds a special kind of fun for me in the game for me. Now I want to touch on the bosses. Similar to the level design in the world itself, this game doesn't have a boss in the base game that I grown when I reach it. In Dark Souls 1 it is Beta Chaos easily, since that's probably my least favorite boss in the entire Dark Souls trilogy. Dark Souls 3 has Crystal Sage, and while it's really not a difficult boss for most people, I have gotten absolutely wrecked by Soul Spears on a Soul Level 1 run, as well as most of my early builds. Since it's an early boss, I usually either get wrecked or kill the boss quickly. Either way, I never look forward to this boss at all. Dark Souls 2 doesn't have bosses like that for me. This is because while majority of them are easier and less imaginative design-wise than its predecessors and successors, the bosses never feel tedious to play against. In fact, I would argue my least favorite boss in the base game, which is the Throne Watcher and Throne Defender, is way more tolerable than my least favorite bosses in the other games. That's not to say this game does not have good bosses. I have always enjoyed Demon of Song and Looking Glass Knight, which the latter may be my favorite boss fight in the base game. Those are examples, as I really do enjoy Nashandra and think she has the best final boss design in the Dark Souls trilogy in my opinion. However, the fight itself is very easy, which tend to drive people to say that the bosses are underwhelming in general. The thing with Dark Souls 2 is that the real bosses are the levels themselves, and the bosses at the end of the level serve as kind of a soft victory lap for the players that could break a level and reach it. It pretty much follows a similar philosophy of Demon Souls, where the levels will be harder with less shape points, but the bosses are a bit easier than the games that succeeded. I do not mind this personally, since it does give you a reason to appreciate the levels more. And since the levels aren't so big that it's obnoxious, it really doesn't hinder the experience for me. Oh, almost forgot. The fashion souls in this game is among my favorite in the franchise. The armor sets are diverse and seem to go well with each other, so you can give yourself a distinct look from other players. They have been among my favorites since it allows you to immerse yourself in the world a bit more in my opinion. Weapon variety is great, so that means that build variety is great also. There's a weapon for almost every kind of playstyle in this game, and due to the game's mechanics with bonfire aesthetic as well as the semi-open world nature of the game, you can get a lot of weapons quickly or a lot of spells near the beginning of the game to finish out your build. This is something a few games in the series have an issue with more oftentimes than not, unfortunately. The healing system is a bit different this time around with the implementation of life gems. They are basically health items you can stack up to 99 while buying them for cheap at a merchant in Majula. And you are able to still move around, unlike the Estus Flash. Your health slowly regenerates, and you can pop multiple life gems to make your health recover quicker. Estus Flash function about the same as the other games, but feels a bit more sluggish in comparison. So I usually use life gems for healing while using the flask outside of combat more often than not. For everybody that played Demon Souls, the life gems are more akin to the grass in that game with the way they are both used. I found the music to be just okay. There are some good ones like the ones I mentioned earlier, but a lot of them aren't very memorable or stand out. However, I do not remember outright hating or finding any of them annoying to hear, so that's somewhat of a good sign, I guess. I never really praised Dark Souls 2 for its music and it's no shot at the game. It's just in comparison to the other Dark Souls games, it is pretty much outshined in my opinion. The others are great, while Dark Souls 2 soundtrack is just good, it's the best way I can put it. Also, I thought the whole lose a small amount of health every time you die until it's reduced to half health little mechanic was a thing I enjoyed. I also like how your character's skin would decay, look more zombie-like, lose hair, and just look straight up ghoulish if you prolonged it. Human effigies are plentiful, and plus early in the game you can grab the Ring of Binding, so your health would never fall below 75% as long as it's equipped. I hear people complain about adaptability or the ADP stat, and while I do agree with the fact that it either should not have been tied to a stat or From Software should have told the community about the stat, the outrage at launch was clearly blown out of proportion. I just do not agree with some people acting as though the minimal amount of adaptability made the game unplayable. My very first playthrough of the game, I played a Strength Fade build with a Grey Shield. I easily beat the game. I did dodge attacks I knew I couldn't block until around Dragon Area, where my stats started being able to allow my shield to take heavier attacks, but before that I was dodging more and I had no problem getting through the game without touching the ADP stat and without summoning anybody. I just don't understand it. I will attest that the hitboxes are among the worst in the series in this game, but it's hard to really call this game out when even Elden Ring has a questionable hitbox problem to this day, but I digress. Last but not least, the game has the best New Game Plus across all Soulsborne games in my opinion. Each Soulsborne game has a New Game Plus that allows you to keep your stats as well as your equipment, access to certain items that can only be gained on the New Game Plus cycle, and scale every enemy and boss up through a multiplier I'm too lazy to look up. Dark Souls 2 does that, plus it adds different enemy spawns across the game to spice things up. There may even be some enemies in the boss arena that wasn't there previously to shake things up and force you to apply a different strategy for the fight. It was just implemented really well, and it's one of those features that has never returned in any of the Soulsborne titles that came after Dark Souls 2, which is a bummer. Well, there you have it. I know that my opinion is not that of the general consensus, but I love Dark Souls 2 and it's my second favorite From Software game after Bloodborne. I never really feel like any of the game drags, and I never dread reaching a new area having to face a bad boss unlike other Soulsborne titles. They are all masterpieces in my eyes, but Dark Souls 2 is a far more consistent game. What you see is what you get. You either love it or hate it, but the game is confirmed with you from the very beginning of what it's going to be like. That's about all I have to say today. What do you think about Dark Souls 2? Is it a game that you enjoy personally? Where would you rank Dark Souls 2 in comparison to other Soulsborne titles? I really want to hear everybody's thoughts even if you disagree, so comment down below and let me know. Also, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, like the video, and please share the video around to every relevant community for me please. Much love everybody. Face signing out.